You need to help your brother. Family comes first, Stephanie. The message from her father sat on her phone like a threat disguised as duty. Stephanie read it 3 times, her hands trembling as she sat alone at her kitchen table in Milwaukee. Before I continue, kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video and tell me where you're watching from. The amount demanded was clear, $200 for her brother Mark's graduation party. Not a request. Not even a conversation. A deadline. Stephanie was 29 years old, a dental hygienist at a busy downtown clinic, and the sole provider for her 5-year-old son, Evan. His father had walked away before Evan was born, and while that absence still ached, it had never hurt as much as the steady neglect from her own family. Across the room, Evan sat on the living room floor stacking colorful blocks, his curls bouncing as he concentrated. He hummed quietly, unaware of the weight pressing down on his mother's chest. Or maybe he was aware, and simply better at hiding it. 3 days earlier, something had shifted, something Stephanie could no longer ignore. The text on her phone wasn't just about money. It was another reminder of where she and her son ranked in her family's priorities. 3 days earlier had been Evan's 5th birthday. Stephanie had planned every detail carefully, starting 6 weeks in advance. Invitations went out to her parents, Richard and Linda, her older brother Mark, and her younger sister Emily. Stephanie followed up with calls, texts, and reminders. She even offered to pick them up, though they all lived less than 20 minutes away. The party was set for 2 in the afternoon. She rented a bounce house, ordered a superhero cake that cost more than she should have spent, and invited Evan's preschool friends. The night before, she stayed up past midnight decorating the backyard, stringing lights and hanging banners until her fingers ached. Evan woke up buzzing with excitement, asking over and over when Grandpa and Grandma would arrive. He wanted to show Uncle Mark his new bike, the one Stephanie had saved for months to buy. Every passing car sent Evan running to the window, his hands pressed to the glass. "Are they here, Mom?" Each time, Stephanie forced a smile and said, "Not yet." By 3 o'clock, the yard was full of laughing children, but not her family. Stephanie called her mother first. Straight to voicemail. Then her father. The same. Mark didn't respond at all. Emily finally sent a short message around 4. "Sorry, something came up." No explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement that a 5-year-old had been waiting. Stephanie held herself together through the rest of the party. She took pictures, passed out cake, and clapped as Evan blew out his candles. But inside, she was unraveling. She watched Evan glance toward the gate again and again, his excitement slowly fading into quiet confusion. When the last guest left and the yard fell silent, Evan walked up to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" The question shattered her. Stephanie knelt and pulled him close, swallowing tears. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." She believed it, but saying it hurt. Sitting at her kitchen table now, staring at her father's demand for money, Stephanie finally allowed herself to see the pattern clearly. This wasn't an isolated disappointment. It was a cycle she had been trapped in for years. The memories lined up too easily. The year before, her parents skipped Evan's 4th birthday. Her mother claimed a headache, her father said he had work. 2 weeks later, Richard called Stephanie asking her to contribute $300 toward Mark's car repairs. "That's what family does," he said. Stephanie paid without protest. The year before that, they attended Evan's 3rd birthday but left after 20 minutes because Emily wanted to go shopping. They didn't stay for the cake. The text on her phone now was cold and precise. "Mark's graduation party is next month. We need $2,200 to cover the venue and catering. Your mother and I are contributing $1,500. You and Emily will split the rest. Send your share by Friday." The math didn't make sense, but it never did when her father wanted something. Stephanie thought about her savings account, the one meant for emergencies, for Evan's future. $2,000 would erase months of careful planning. All for a celebration for a brother who couldn't spare an hour for her child. Something inside her hardened. She had spent her entire life being dependable, quiet, and accommodating. And it had left her alone at a kitchen table, comforting a child who felt unwanted. Stephanie opened her banking app and stared at the screen for a long moment. Her heart pounded as she typed in the amount, $1. In the memo line, she wrote, "Best wishes." She sent it before doubt could stop her. The confirmation appeared instantly. She had never defied her father like this. Growing up, Richard ruled with quiet control. He rarely raised his voice, but his disappointment carried weight. Linda always backed him, smoothing over his behavior, explaining it away. Mark could do no wrong. Emily was protected. Stephanie, the middle child, was expected to manage herself, and everyone else. Years later, therapy gave her a name for it: parentification. At 12, she packed Mark's lunches. At 14, she helped raise Emily. People called her responsible. What they meant was useful. She learned not to ask for help. When she wanted a dress for a school dance, there was no money. Months later, Mark received a new gaming console. When Stephanie graduated high school, they celebrated at home. When Mark graduated, they rented a restaurant. Stephanie had told herself not to take it personally, but the evidence had always been there. Becoming pregnant at 23 only deepened the divide. Evan's father disappeared the moment she told him. Her parents responded with disappointment wrapped in empty promises of support. They missed prenatal appointments. They didn't help prepare the nursery. When Stephanie went into labor early and called her mother in panic, Linda said she couldn't come. She had plans with Emily. Stephanie gave birth alone, holding onto the hand of a kind nurse who stayed by her side. After Evan was born, her parents visited occasionally, bringing small gifts and taking photos to show friends. But the imbalance remained. Everything still revolved around Mark and Emily. When Evan was 18 months old, Stephanie's car broke down. The repair cost $800. Richard lectured her before agreeing to lend the money. She paid him back in full within 6 months. 2 years later, Mark totaled his car while driving drunk. Richard bought him a replacement outright. No repayment expected. When Stephanie questioned it, Linda said Mark needed support. Stephanie didn't argue again. She tried once more, a year later, to explain how their favoritism hurt her and Evan. Richard crossed his arms and said she was too sensitive. Linda agreed. That was when Stephanie stopped expecting change. Still, hope had crept back in before Evan's 5th birthday. She told them how excited he was, how much it mattered. They didn't even cancel. Now, staring at the $1 payment confirmation, Stephanie felt something settle into place. This wasn't anger alone. It was clarity. Her phone buzzed. "I don't see the full payment," Richard wrote. "There must be a bank error. Please resend $2,200. Stephanie didn't reply. Instead, she opened her contacts and scrolled to a number she'd saved months earlier: Daniel Harris, a real estate attorney. Her parents didn't know she'd been planning an exit. The house Stephanie lived in was jointly owned. Her father had co-signed the mortgage years earlier. At the time, she'd been grateful. Later, she realized it was leverage. 6 months ago, after being told she was imagining things, Stephanie began researching refinancing. 3 months ago, Daniel confirmed it was possible. 1 month ago, it was done. The house was hers, completely. Richard just didn't know yet. She texted her best friend. "Are you free tonight?" Sarah replied immediately. "Always. Come over after Evan's asleep." Sarah had been Stephanie's anchor since college. She'd seen enough family gatherings to understand the imbalance. She'd been at Evan's birthday party, watching him wait by the window. That night, Sarah opened her door with 2 glasses of wine already poured. "You look like you're about to change your life," she said. Stephanie told her everything: the demand, the dollar transfer, the refinancing. Sarah stared at her. "You took him off the deed." Stephanie nodded. "Last month." Sarah exhaled slowly. "He's going to explode." "I know," Stephanie said. "I'm done bending." They talked through next steps: changing the locks, documenting messages, preparing for backlash. Richard didn't tolerate defiance. The next morning, while Evan was at a playdate, Sarah drove Stephanie to the hardware store. They bought new deadbolts. Back home, Stephanie replaced them herself. Each turn of the screwdriver felt like reclaiming something she'd lost. She stepped back and looked at the door. Her house. Her rules. Her phone buzzed again. "Send the money by tomorrow or we lose the venue," Richard warned. Stephanie replied once. "I sent what I could afford. Best wishes to Mark." The response came quickly. "We'll discuss this in person. I'll be there tomorrow at noon." Stephanie's stomach tightened. She didn't want Evan there. She called Sarah immediately. "Can Evan stay with you tomorrow?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course." Stephanie also called Daniel Harris. "I need certified proof the house is mine," she said, "in case someone challenges it." Daniel promised the documents by Monday. That night, Stephanie barely slept. She knew Richard would arrive expecting control. But the locks had changed, and so had she. Sunday morning, she dropped Evan at Sarah's, promising ice cream later. At noon, a car pulled into her driveway. Stephanie watched through the peephole as Richard tried his key. It didn't work. His confusion turned to fury. She opened the door with the chain on. "I changed the locks," she said calmly. "It's my house." Richard shouted about co-signing. Stephanie told him the truth. She refinanced. Linda arrived just in time to hear it. The argument escalated until Stephanie said the words she'd never said before. "Leave my property." When Richard threatened consequences, she closed the door. Her hands shook, but she didn't open it again. The fallout was immediate. Calls, texts, accusations, a family meeting demand. Stephanie declined. That evening, she made dinner with Evan, listened to him talk about spiders at school, and tucked him into bed. Later, her phone buzzed non-stop. A final message from Richard warned her she'd regret this. She didn't respond. Monday brought silence. During lunch, she picked up Daniel's envelope, certified proof of ownership. That evening, after the park, cars filled her driveway again. Richard, Linda, Mark, Emily, all uninvited. Stephanie opened the door with the chain on and told them to leave. Richard called the police. Stephanie prepared calmly, laying out documents and photos. When officers arrived, the law was clear. The house was hers. Her child was safe. Her family was trespassing. She declined charges but demanded space. As they left, Richard promised regret. Stephanie watched them go, her legs weak but her resolve steady. Inside, Evan played quietly, unaware of how close she'd come to breaking a cycle. Stephanie sat beside him and smiled. "Everything's okay," she said. For the first time, she believed it. The quiet that followed felt unnatural. Stephanie expected more messages, more pressure, but her phone stayed silent for 2 days. She went to work, smiled at patients, and followed routines as if nothing had changed. At home, she cooked dinner, helped Evan with puzzles, and read bedtime stories. Still, unease followed her. Richard never backed down quietly. On the 4th evening, her phone rang from an unfamiliar number. A woman introduced herself calmly. "This is Ms. Adams from Child Protective Services. We received a report concerning your son, Evan. I need to schedule a home visit." Stephanie's chest tightened. She knew immediately who had made the call. She agreed to a visit the next afternoon and hung up, shaking with anger rather than fear. Evan was healthy, loved, and safe, but her father had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She called Sarah and explained everything. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We'll prepare. He won't win this." That night, Stephanie cleaned the house thoroughly, not because it was unsafe, but because she refused to give anyone even the smallest excuse. She gathered medical records, school reports, and photos from Evan's birthday. By morning, exhaustion weighed on her, but her resolve was sharper than ever. Sarah arrived before noon with a folder full of documents. She'd contacted Evan's preschool teacher, Ms. Wilson, who wrote a letter praising Stephanie's involvement and Evan's development. When Ms. Adams arrived exactly at 2, she was professional and observant. She toured the house, checked safety measures, and asked to speak with Evan. He answered every question simply, proudly describing his dinosaur sheets and favorite dinners. Ms. Adams smiled often. When the interview ended, she sat with Stephanie and Sarah at the table. "The allegations don't align with what I see," she said plainly. She confirmed the report came from Evan's grandfather. "I'll be closing this case as unfounded." Relief flooded Stephanie, followed quickly by fury. This had been retaliation, nothing more. Ms. Adams advised documentation and legal protection if harassment continued. After she left, Stephanie sank onto the couch. "He tried to take my child," she said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Then you stop him, legally." That afternoon, Stephanie scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney. Enough was enough. Laura Bennett's office felt calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the chaos Stephanie described. Laura listened without interruption, reviewing messages, police reports, and the CPS closure notice. "This is harassment," she said finally. "Escalated harassment." She explained the process for a restraining order and recommended acting quickly. Stephanie didn't hesitate. They filed that afternoon, requesting protection for both her and Evan. The temporary order would be served within 48 hours. As Stephanie left the office, she felt a strange mix of grief and strength. That evening, Mark called.
Stephanie almost ignored it but answered. He sounded shaken. "Dad's losing it," he said. "He shouldn't have called CPS. I told him that." Stephanie listened without interrupting. "I'm done, Mark," she said calmly. "With all of this." He didn't argue. They ended the call quietly.
2 days later, a process server mistakenly came to Stephanie's house looking for Richard. She corrected the address with a small, bitter smile. That same afternoon, she received confirmation. Richard had been served with the restraining order.
The storm was no longer emotional. It was legal.
The reaction was immediate. Linda left voicemails begging Stephanie to stop. Emily sent angry messages accusing her of cruelty. Stephanie saved everything and didn't respond.
Sarah came over that night with takeout and quiet reassurance.
"You're protecting your son," she said. "That's the only truth that matters." 10 days later, Stephanie stood in court beside Laura Bennett. Richard sat across from her with an attorney, his expression rigid. The judge listened carefully as Laura presented evidence, messages, police involvement, CPS findings. Richard claimed concern.
The judge asked questions. Clear ones. Why he missed Evan's birthday. Why he demanded money.
Why he called CPS after being denied access.
Richard had no convincing answers.
When the ruling came, it was swift.
The restraining order was made permanent for 4 years.
Richard was ordered to stay away from Stephanie, her home, her workplace, and Evan's school. Stephanie felt her shoulders relax for the first time in months. Outside the courtroom, Laura shook her hand. "You did exactly what you needed to do." Stephanie believed her. That night, a single message came from an unknown number.
"You've lost your family."
Stephanie forwarded it to Laura and blocked the number. 2 more violations followed over the next month, each documented. After one resulted in a brief jail stay for contempt, the contact stopped entirely. The silence that followed felt different, lighter.
Stephanie focused on building a calm life.
Evan started kindergarten and thrived.
Stephanie received a promotion at work.
She and Sarah planned weekends filled with museums, parks, and quiet joy. When Evan turned 6, they hosted a small party.
No waiting by windows. No empty chairs. Just laughter and cake and people who showed up.
As Evan blew out his candles, Stephanie watched him closely.
He smiled without searching the crowd.
Later that night, after he fell asleep, Stephanie stood in her kitchen and thought about the cost of peace. It had been high, but worth every step.
She hadn't destroyed her family. She had stopped allowing herself and her child to be hurt. And that was something she would never apologize for.
In the weeks after the restraining order became permanent, Stephanie focused on restoring normalcy.
Not the forced version she had lived with before. Mornings began without dread.
Evenings ended without replaying conversations in her head. Evan adjusted quickly, as children often do when given safety and consistency. He stopped asking about missed visits and focused instead on school projects and playground friendships. Stephanie noticed how much emotional labor she had been carrying without realizing it, anticipating outbursts, smoothing conflicts, absorbing blame. Without that constant pressure, her energy returned. She cooked more thoughtfully, slept more deeply, laughed more freely. Work became easier too. Her supervisor noticed the change and trusted her with more responsibility. Stephanie didn't announce her growth or justify her decisions.
She simply lived them.
Occasionally, guilt surfaced, but it no longer ruled her. She reminded herself that protecting her child was not an act of hostility.
It was an act of care.
The law had drawn a clay line where emotional appeals once blurred reality. And within that line, Stephanie felt something unfamiliar but welcome: stability. The extended family reacted in subtle, fractured ways. Linda stopped reaching out entirely, choosing silence over accountability. Emily sent one long message filled with accusations and confusion, which Stephanie read once and archived without reply. Mark kept his distance, unsure how to exist outside the role of favored son. Stephanie didn't chase explanations or reconciliation. She had learned that closure doesn't always come from conversation.
Sometimes it comes from clarity.
She spent her time instead with people who showed up: Sarah, co-workers who became friends, parents she met through Evan's school. Relationships no longer felt like negotiations.
They felt mutual.
One afternoon, Evan asked why Grandpa didn't come around anymore.
Stephanie paused, then answered gently.
Sometimes adults don't know how to behave kindly. And when that happens, we choose safety. Evan accepted this without protest, more interested in finishing his drawing. Stephanie watched him and felt something settle inside her.
She wasn't erasing history.
She was shaping the future. And it looked calmer than anything she'd known before. The restraining order faded into the background of daily life, present but no longer consuming her thoughts. Stephanie kept records, as advised, but there were no new violations.
Richard's silence felt final this time. Not strategic.
Just empty. Stephanie realized how much power he'd drawn from reaction, and how powerless he became without it.
She began to think less about what she had lost and more about what she had gained.
Freedom from obligation.
Freedom from fear.
Freedom from being useful instead of valued.
She enrolled Evan in a weekend art class. They started a tradition of Friday movie nights. Small rituals, but grounding ones.
On quiet evenings, Stephanie sometimes reflected on the girl she used to be, always careful, always accommodating.
She didn't judge her. She understood her. That version of herself had survived the only way she knew how. But survival was no longer the goal. Peace was.
And peace required boundaries, not explanations. Stephanie didn't need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her.
She needed to keep moving forward.
One afternoon, while watching Evan play at the park, Stephanie realized something unexpected.
She no longer felt like she was waiting.
Waiting for approval. Waiting for forgiveness.
Waiting for the next demand.
Her body felt lighter, as if it had released a tension it had carried for decades. Evan ran toward her, breathless and smiling. "Did you see that?" he asked, proud of a small victory on the monkey bars. Stephanie smiled back, fully present.
She hadn't just protected her child from harm. She had modeled self-respect.
She thought about what Evan was learning now, not from lectures, but from observation.
That love doesn't hurt. That home is safe. That boundaries are normal.
That no one gets to demand access to you simply because of a title. These lessons mattered more than apologies ever could.
Stephanie understood now that healing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It looked like consistency.
Like choosing peace again and again, even when no one applauded. As summer turned into fall, Stephanie felt settled in a way she never had before. The past no longer dictated her reactions. It informed them, but it didn't control them.
She had learned that walking away didn't mean she failed. It meant she stopped participating in harm.
One evening, Sarah joined her and Evan for dinner.
They laughed easily, without heaviness.
After Evan went to bed, Stephanie stood at the sink washing dishes and felt a simple, undeniable truth take root. This was enough.
Not perfect. Not painless. But honest.
She had chosen a life built on presence, not performance.
On safety, not sacrifice.
Whatever came next, she knew she could face it. She had already faced the hardest thing, choosing herself and her child when it mattered most. By the time winter arrived, Stephanie no longer felt the need to check over her shoulder.
The legal boundaries held. The emotional ones did too.
Life settled into a rhythm shaped by choice instead of reaction. Evan grew more confident, more expressive, no longer watching adults for tension he didn't understand. His questions were about school projects, favorite books, and whether snow angels counted as exercise. Stephanie noticed how her home sounded different now, less sharp, more gentle. Even silence felt safe. She kept her routines simple and intentional, focusing on what strengthened rather than drained her. There were moments when grief surfaced, usually in quiet spaces, but it no longer carried confusion.
She allowed it, then let it pass.
The absence of constant conflict created room for something new, contentment.
She hadn't forced it. She'd earned it through clarity and courage.
Family, she understood now, wasn't about proximity or obligation. It was about consistency, respect, and care that didn't need to be negotiated. Occasionally, Stephanie caught glimpses of her former life, old habits resurfacing in moments of stress. The instinct to apologize when she wasn't wrong. The urge to explain decisions that needed no defense. Each time, she corrected herself gently. Growth wasn't about never slipping, it was about noticing and choosing differently. Evan benefited most from this shift. He watched his mother make decisions calmly, without fear, and learned that strength didn't have to be loud. One afternoon, while coloring together at the kitchen table, Evan said, "Our house feels happy." Stephanie paused, surprised by the simplicity of the observation.
"I think so too," she replied.
She realized then that happiness didn't come from fixing broken relationships. It came from refusing to keep breaking herself. The life she was building wasn't flashy or dramatic.
It was steady. And that steadiness was something she had never known before. Spring brought new routines.
Weekend library visits.
Park afternoons that stretched into evening.
Friendships that deepened without pressure. Stephanie no longer measured her worth by how much she gave or how little she asked for. She had learned that generosity without reciprocity wasn't kindness, it was depletion. One evening, after Evan fell asleep, she stood on the porch watching the streetlights flicker on. She thought about the version of herself who once believed endurance was the same as love. She wished she could tell her that love doesn't demand erasure. That loyalty isn't proven through suffering. Letting go hadn't made Stephanie bitter.
It had made her clear. She wasn't angry anymore. She was resolved.
And resolution, she discovered, was far more powerful. On Evan's 7th birthday, Stephanie planned something small and honest.
A picnic at the park. Cupcakes instead of cake.
A handful of friends who showed up because they wanted to. Evan ran freely, laughing without scanning the crowd.
Stephanie watched him blow out his candles, his face bright and unguarded. No waiting. No wondering. Just joy.
Later, Evan leaned against her and said, "This was my favorite birthday."
The words settled deep in her chest.
She realized that what she had protected wasn't just his safety, it was his sense of worth. She had chosen a life where love arrived without conditions. Where presence mattered more than appearances. Where home meant peace. Stephanie once believed family was something you endured. Something you earned by being quiet, useful, and compliant.
It took walking away to understand the truth.
Family is built through care, not control. Through showing up, not keeping score. She hadn't lost her family, she had protected the one that mattered most. That night, she stood in Evan's doorway and watched him sleep, breathing slow and steady. The house was quiet, not empty.
Peaceful.
Stephanie turned off the light and walked back into her living room, finally at rest in a life she had chosen. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where your own boundaries stand.
Would you have done the same in her place? Thank you for watching.
Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.